Nolan Archer didn't see the problem. The aluminum can hiss as he cracked it open, condensation sliding down his fingers. The liquid inside was near black, carbonated, and laced with enough caffeine to make a cardiologist flinch. He took a long swallow, eyes still half shut, standing in the middle of the interspecies cultural exchange kitchen. Morning fuel, he muttered, voice gravelly, as if the act of speaking before consuming the drink was a crime against his biology. Across the table, Plenth observed him with the same expression he'd given a holographic sculpture of a collapsed neutron star last semester, curious, cautious, and mildly horrified. "You were ingesting a Class 4 neurostimulant," Plenth said, his voice calm but pitched up in frequency, indicating confusion in his species. His translucent skin caught the overhead lights, casting a faint opalescent shimmer across the table. Nolan blinked. "It's just an energy drink." "It is not," Plenth replied, leaning forward. "It contains 300 milligrams of caffeine. That is, by your own medical standards, bordering on toxic." Nolan took another sip. Still not awake. Plenth didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his satchel and pulled out a data slate, tapping quickly. Blue symbols danced across the screen. "You call this morning fuel." "Why?" "Because it fuels the morning." Nolan yawned. "It's either this or I fall asleep on the shuttle and miss class." Plenth stared at him for 6 seconds without blinking, then looked down at the can again. "Your species has access to regulated sleep cycles, nutritional supplements, and even neural entrainment devices. And yet, you choose this." "I also choose to microwave lasagna at 2 in the morning," Nolan said. "We're big on choices." Plenth slowly turned the can around in his fingers, reading the label. "This contains taurine, guarana extract, synthetic B12, and niacin." "Nolan, do you understand that your liver is processing a biochemical cocktail originally designed to enhance performance in military pilots?" Nolan shrugged. "And it's working." "I'm awake." The kitchen door whooshed open, letting in a breeze of recycled air and Dana Laurel, their resident human linguistics major. She took one look at Nolan and sighed. "Another one?" she asked, nodding to the can. "Yup. I thought your doctor said to cut back after the incident last month." Nolan raised a finger. "Technically, he said reconsider your lifestyle choices. That's not a direct order." Dana dropped her bag on the counter and looked at Plenth. "He drank 2 last time. Passed out in the gym. They found him underneath an elliptical." "I am aware," Plenth said. "He attempted to argue with the paramedics while unconscious." "I was lucid," Nolan protested. "You said your name was Captain Burrito and demanded the right to duel the moon." Nolan opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Okay. That part one don't remember." Plenth sat back in his chair, his elongated fingers laced together. "I am attempting to understand how a species with such fragile biochemistry has normalized the routine consumption of borderline toxic substances for the sake of temporary alertness." Dana opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of iced tea. "It's not about biology, Plenth. It's about culture. We've built our entire morning routine around stimulants. Coffee, energy drinks, energy gum, pick your poison. Some literally are poison," Nolan added, holding up the can. "This one warns not to exceed 2 in a day. Want to guess how many I've had today?" Plenth recoiled slightly. "More than 1. 3, Nolan said, grinning. "I'm riding lightning." Dana slapped the can out of his hand. It clanged against the floor and rolled under the table. "Hey, you're going to give yourself arrhythmia," she said. "Again." Plenth stood abruptly. "I must study this further." "Nolan, would you consent to a biometric scan under controlled conditions?" "No," Nolan said instantly. "Last time you scanned me, I couldn't taste oranges for a week. I recalibrated the probe. It will not affect your citrus perception this time." "No thanks." Plenth turned to Dana. "Will you assist me in documenting the physiological effects of this morning fuel phenomenon?" Dana glanced at Nolan. "If he keeps this up, you'll be able to document his funeral." "I am present," Nolan said. "And insulted." "Good," Dana replied. Plenth tapped his data slate again. Then I propose an experiment. Nolan, you will abstain from all forms of caffeine for 1 standard week. Nolan looked at the ceiling. I'd rather fight a grizzly bear. Then I will procure a grizzly bear. That was a joke, Plenth. I am aware. But if you are unwilling to abstain, I must explore alternate scenarios for understanding your response to these substances. You're not actually going to get a bear, right? Dana asked. I have already submitted a requisition. Approval pending. Nolan groaned. Okay, fine. 1 week, no caffeine. But if I fall asleep during interspecies ethics, I'm blaming you. You may blame me, Plenth said, already logging the agreement into his slate. This will be most enlightening. By day 2, Nolan was visibly deteriorating. He slumped in his desk during class, eyes red, head bobbing like a buoy in rough water. Plenth sat beside him, monitoring his vitals with a small wrist sensor. You're cold, Plenth observed. I'm dying, Nolan whispered. Your temperature is normal. My soul is cold. Dana, seated on Nolan's other side, handed him a granola bar. Eat something. I can't eat. My body runs on caffeine, and I've betrayed it. You're detoxing, she said. It'll pass. Will it? Nolan asked. Or will I just become a husk of a man who used to know what energy felt like? Plenth made a note. Subject exhibits signs of psychological dependency and exaggerated dramatization. Possibly a coping mechanism. I'm sitting right here, Nolan said. Noted, Plenth added. By day 4, things took a turn. Nolan collapsed in the hallway outside the cafeteria, hitting the tile floor with a dull thud. Dana rushed to his side while Plenth scanned him. He's dehydrated, Dana said. And his blood sugar's low. Plenth adjusted the scanner. Heart rate irregular. I believe the abrupt cessation of stimulants has disrupted his autonomic regulation. Great, Dana muttered. Wean him off slowly, you said. I wanted a controlled variable. Well, you got a collapsed variable. Nolan groaned. I see the light. It's decuff. Plenth looked concerned. We must take him to the medical wing. Tests confirmed Nolan hadn't suffered any permanent damage, but he was instructed to reintroduce caffeine in small quantities no more than 100 milligrams a day. The attending physician, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Halpern, gave him a list of approved beverages, most of which Nolan claimed tasted like sad water. Plenth watched the entire process with the intensity of a documentarian filming a tiger's first encounter with snow. Your body reacted violently to both the presence and absence of the substance, Plenth said, days later, as Nolan nursed a half-empty cup of black tea. I'm aware. And yet you continue. Yup. Why? Nolan stared into his cup. Because I've got classes and labs and scholarship deadlines. And I'm not a morning person. This, he held up the cup, gives me a head start. Plenth tilted his head. You are willing to risk your health for transient productivity? I'm willing to risk a lot for 5 more minutes of mental clarity. Dana entered the room, tossing a file onto the table. He's not alone, Plenth. There's a reason we have a whole aisle of this stuff in every store back home. Plenth nodded slowly. Your species is remarkable. Not for its strength or intellect, but for its willingness to push itself beyond safe limits, even for routine tasks. Nolan took a sip. We call it survival. No, Plenth said. You call it morning fuel. Plenth had been watching Nolan for 8 straight minutes. Not blinking, not moving, just staring with the silent intensity of someone convinced they were witnessing the final movements of an endangered species. I'm not going to combust, Nolan muttered, tugging the sleeve of his hoodie down over his hand as he tapped through his tablet. You can stop watching me like I'm a defective reactor core. I am not anticipating combustion, Plenth replied. I am observing baseline recalibration post-stimulant dependency. Your ocular micro-movements indicate elevated stress. Nolan didn't look up. That's because I'm trying to finish a 500-word summary of xenopsych ethics without falling face first into my screen. You should lie down, Plenth said. Your posture is collapsing inward. I'm conserving heat. It's 22 degrees Celsius. Emotionally, it's colder. Across the lounge, a group of Cornetti students were huddled around a circular table, their voices clicking in overlapping waves of trilled consonants. One of them kept glancing at Nolan, whispering something that made the rest of the group ripple with amusement. They think you're undergoing withdrawal from a behavioral suppressant, Plenth said, still tracking Nolan's vitals on his slate. They are confused why you do not simply undergo neural modulation. I don't have $5,000 and a death wish, Nolan said without looking up. They believe you are demonstrating willpower. I'm demonstrating desperation. Plenth turned back toward the group and blinked 3 times in sequence. The Cornetti blinked back, visibly unsettled, and returned to their conversation in quieter tones. I requested they refrain from speculative commentary, Plenth said. Appreciate it. A rhythmic thump echoed through the floor. From the upper walkway, a tall, mossy-skinned being descended the stairs with a slow, deliberate gait. Their limbs were jointed in odd places, and their face bore no distinguishable features, just a smooth, bioluminescent membrane that pulsed faintly with teal light. Oh, Nolan muttered. That's a supervisor. That is Lecturer Emrayli, Plenth said. They oversee interspecies behavioral studies. I haven't done anything. You are the only student currently under observational restriction for stimulant abstinence. Your file has circulated. Oh, fantastic. Emrayli approached without preamble and stopped directly beside the couch where Nolan sat. Their scent was faintly metallic, like old coins after a rainstorm. You are the human-designated Nolan Archer, they said. Guilty. You are currently undergoing voluntary cessation of an addictive substance. Still guilty. Emrayli's membrane pulsed once. Do you consent to a brief assessment of your adaptive capacity? Am I allowed to say no? You are. But your refusal will be documented as a data point of avoidance behavior under duress. Nolan sighed. All right. What kind of assessment? Emrayli extended one long arm and placed a small, spherical device on the low table. It began to vibrate softly. This is a cognitive load simulation, they said. You will be asked to complete a series of tasks while exposed to minor environmental stressors. It is timed. I already feel like I'm failing at life. You want to quantify it? That is the intention. Plenth looked intrigued. I did not authorize this. But I am curious. Nolan leaned forward and cracked his knuckles. Let's find out how badly I crash. A thin projection rose from the sphere, displaying a floating interface of shapes, symbols, and numbers. Emrayli tapped something on their wrist and the air around the couch dropped by several degrees. Environmental alteration activated, they said. Begin. Nolan's fingers moved slowly at first, then gradually sped up. The tasks shifted without warning: language puzzles, quick arithmetic, pattern matching. A low-pitched hum began to broadcast from the device, just below the threshold of pain but above comfort. Nasty, Nolan muttered, squinting. Stressor 2 initiated, Emrayli said. A faint strobing light began to flicker from the device's base. Not enough to impair vision, but enough to create a growing sense of agitation. Your temporal lobe activity is escalating, Plenth said. You're entering a stress compensatory mode. Feels like a Monday. Your sarcasm is increasing. It's a coping mechanism. The simulation grew faster. Symbols blurred into blocks. Numbers turned red when answered wrong. Nolan's breathing shallowed, but his hands didn't stop. He squinted harder, tapping and swiping with the stubborn focus of someone solving a Rubik's Cube in the middle of a fire drill. After 12 minutes, the interface vanished. Emrayli tilted their head. Cognitive accuracy, 76%. Response time, suboptimal. Perseverance, statistically anomalous. I'm gonna take that as a passing grade, Nolan mumbled. You exhibited a high tolerance for multi-sensory interference and maintained task completion under adverse conditions. You mean I didn't give up? That is one interpretation. Plenth leaned over. Your prefrontal cortex was underactive, yet you maintained sequential logic. Fascinating. You compensated through sheer behavioral momentum. I call it stubbornness, Nolan said, rubbing his eyes. It's genetic. Emrayli turned slightly toward Plenth. You will forward the biometric data? Already syncing it. Emrayli looked back at Nolan. Your species is inefficient, but remarkably persistent. We try. Do not stop the abstinence protocol yet, Emrayli said. I wish to observe further adaptation over the next 2 cycles. 2 more days, Nolan asked. Correct. I'm not going to be useful to anyone. That is precisely why it is valuable. They picked up the simulation device and left without another word. The lounge quieted again. Nolan leaned back, hand on his forehead. That was miserable. You performed better than I expected, Plenth said, sounding almost disappointed. Gee, thanks. I mean it. Your species' capacity to endure discomfort for the sake of completing arbitrary tasks is excessive. That's how we got through school back home. And traffic. And taxes. Plenth tilted his head. Is this behavior trained or innate? A little of both. From the other side of the lounge, a student from the YSHTT coalition approached. They had a gelatinous appearance and moved with a shuddering glide, like a water balloon rolling uphill. I witnessed your assessment, they said. Are you always like this? No, Nolan said. Usually I'm worse. The YSHTT paused. You should be non-functional. Your neurochemical output is below optimal thresholds. Yeah, well, humans are weird. We keep going even when our brains tell us we shouldn't. Why? Because someone always says we can't. The YSHTT blinked. That is illogical. Tell that to the guy who ran a marathon with a broken foot. I would recommend against it. The YSHTT drifted off, murmuring to themselves. Plenth folded his slate closed. You defy expectations. Not intentionally. Perhaps not. But you may have inadvertently proven more than I hypothesized. He paused. Would you be amenable to participating in a cross-species resilience symposium next week? Will there be snacks? Possibly. Then I'll think about it. They sat in silence for a moment. Nolan's hand trembled slightly as he sipped his tea, but there was no caffeine in it, just bitter herbs and a stubborn sense of pride. You know, he said quietly, I get why everyone thinks we're reckless. But there's something kind of beautiful about refusing to quit. Plenth nodded once. Even when logic demands it. Especially then. Nolan adjusted his chair again. The seat had never been comfortable, but today it felt especially hostile, too stiff on the back and too low for the table, like it was designed by someone who'd only seen humans described in a vague diagram. The study hall was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of someone shifting through notes, or the soft warble of a Illic student practicing tonal modulation drills 3 booths down. Plenth sat across from him, slate in hand, attention flicking between Nolan's face and the biometric monitor clipped to his earlobe. The device had left a faint red mark, but Nolan didn't bother protesting. He'd agreed to the final checkup as a condition of ending the abstinence week early. 40 hours had passed since his last drop of caffeine. He was surviving on momentum, peanut butter crackers, and a sheer refusal to let Plenth win. You were perspiring more than baseline, Plenth said without looking up. I just climbed 4 flights of stairs, Nolan replied. Because someone insisted the elevator was an uncontrolled variable. It was. You're becoming dangerously good at being annoying. That is not my goal. Then you're overachieving. A low chime sounded from Plenth's slate. He tapped twice, studied the results, then exhaled through the lower set of spiracles along his neck. You are no longer experiencing acute withdrawal. However, your cortisol levels remain elevated. I'm a college student. That's just my default setting. Plenth tilted his head slightly. You also have minor tremors in 2 fingers. Nolan held up his hand. His ring and middle fingers twitched slightly, then steadied. They'll stop once I eat something that didn't come from a vending machine. I have brought appropriate nutrition, Plenth said, reaching under the table. Nolan leaned forward. Please tell me it's not another nutrient paste packet. Plenth produced a compact container and placed it on the table. Inside were 6 perfectly arranged slices of something orange and gelatinous. It is a Glixian root starch cube. Mildly sweet, high in complex carbohydrates, and easily digestible. I'm not eating alien gel. It has no gelatin. It is derived from tubers. I'm still not eating it. Ingesting one will assist in restoring glycogen stores. I'd rather chew cardboard. Plenth pushed the container closer. Your digestive tract has shown resilience to more hostile compounds this week alone. 1 cube will not harm you. Nolan stared at the cubes for a long moment, then picked one up. It wobbled between his fingers like it was considering escape. I swear, if I hallucinate a second moon again, that was unrelated and caused by your own overconsumption of methylxanthines. He took a bite. It was cold, faintly citrusy, and had the texture of a wet sponge. He chewed with quiet resentment. Better than I expected, he admitted. I will note that. A soft tap at the table edge drew their attention. A student with segmented limbs and a triangular cranial plate stood beside them. Her name tag read Tarnik in both Galactic Standard and a series of hexagonal glyphs. You are the caffeine subject, she said. I've been called worse. I have reviewed your trial data. Your endurance under chemical deprivation is a subject of interest in my comparative resilience thesis. Glad I could help. I have a question, she continued. When deprived of your substance of choice, you demonstrated sleep fragmentation, attentional narrowing, and thermal dysregulation. Yet you continued attending classes, completed assignments, and participated in a high cognitive stress test. Why? Because nobody's gonna give me a break just because I'm tired, Nolan said. The world doesn't pause when my brain's having a meltdown. Tarnik blinked one eye at a time. You accept systemic dysfunction as a normal state? No, Nolan said. I just plan around it. Plenth looked up from his slate. Your response aligns with a behavioral pattern I've observed across several human students. A form of anticipatory compensation. You prepare for your own failure in advance. That's called being responsible. It is called pessimism with structure. Nolan shrugged. Whatever works. Tarnik nodded. I will incorporate this into my findings. Thank you. She walked away with the same rhythmic click her species used to communicate urgency, possibly now reclassified as academic enthusiasm. Plenth tapped something on his slate again. I am logging this as the final entry in your observation file. You mean it's over? Yes. You may resume your previous biochemical habits. So I can have coffee now? If you wish. Nolan stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. Bless every molecule in this universe. You should begin with a reduced dose. I'm starting with a cappuccino and ending with whatever's legally classified as rocket fuel. He was halfway across the room when Plenth called after him. I have prepared a chart of recommended dosage intervals. Nolan waved over his shoulder without turning. Send it to my inbox. It took him 7 minutes to reach the cafe on the south end of the campus promenade. The line was mercifully short. The scent of roasted beans hit him like a nostalgia trip to every finals week he'd ever survived. He ordered a medium cappuccino, nothing fancy, just hot and foamy and real. When he returned to the table, Plenth was still seated, still watching. You appear content, he observed. I'm not content. I'm alive again. Is there a distinction? Nolan took a long sip, eyes closing briefly. Absolutely. Plenth made a note. Then your species equates certain ingested substances with existential validation. Only the good ones. Would you consider reducing your intake going forward? I'd consider it, Nolan said. Right after I forget what day it is again. Plenth paused. The goal of the trial was not to eliminate your habits, but to understand them. And? I understand them now. I do not approve, but I understand. That's progress. You are a case study in contradiction. I've been called worse. A silence settled between them, not awkward, but conclusive. The kind that follows a long week of data, discomfort, and too many lectures given and received. Nolan leaned back, cradling his cup. You know what the worst part was? Plenth looked up. The dreams. I had this one where I was trapped in a never-ending line at a DMV, but it was on a spaceship and every form was in Klingon. That is not a recognized dialect. Tell that to the guy who kept shouting at me in it. Plenth folded his slate shut. You may find this ironic, but I have requested to present our findings at the Interfaculty Symposium next quarter. About me, about humans, and their willingness to function through chemical imbalance, sleep deprivation, and self-imposed cognitive debt. That's a flattering summary. It will be titled, Adaptive Recklessness, the Human Condition. Nolan laughed. Sounds about right. Plenth stood. Would you like to review the final report? Nah, I lived it. They walked out together, the sun just beginning to dip behind the campus spires, casting long shadows across the promenade. The air was still warm. A few students lounged in the grass, some reading, others balancing on hover discs or tossing soft spheres between them. Plenth stopped at the edge of the path. You should avoid consuming more than 2 doses in a day. I'll try. You won't. Nope. They parted ways without ceremony. Nolan took another sip, slower this time, letting the taste settle. His fingers no longer shook. His pulse had evened out. And for the first time in days, his thoughts weren't racing or fuzzy, they were just his. He looked up at the sky, streaked with lavender and gold, and smiled. Morning fuel, he whispered. Still undefeated.